right, so my name is Grant Fifield. I'm a seminarian at Bethel Seminary, and the way this panel kind of came about is in my senior seminar class. I wrote a paper about food scarcity in Minnesota and what that looks like, and how I had this idea that if you were able to have nursing homes, for example, which I want to be a hospice chaplain someday, so if you could have nursing homes produce or have a community garden where 50% of the food went to the nursing home residents. There's studies that show that good food helps people improve their daily lives, and then also the other half go to the people taking care of the residents, because a lot of nursing home workers are immigrants, and so they don't have a lot of money for food, and they're also a population that needs it. That would improve everybody's situation and take the burden off of some food shelves that maybe don't get a lot of the fresh fruit and produce that they need. So that's kind of how this whole thing came about. And then I learned of a Kern Foundation grant of $1,000 to seminary students, and so I put a proposal forward, and I got money to both not only pay our panelists, but also provide food for you guys this morning, so feel free to eat as much as you want. And so thank you to the Kern Foundation for taking time to invest in us as students. We'll start at the end here and have Christine introduce herself, and then we'll go down the line, and you guys can share your name and where you're at and what you do and how you think that you can contribute to this panel.
I'm Christine Pulver. I'm the director of the Basic Needs Program with Keystone Community Services. We operate 3 bricks and mortar food shelves serving St. Paul and suburban Ramsey County. You're probably very familiar with one of our sites right across the street. We also run a food mobile, which is a shuttle bus that we stripped out and turned into a food shelf on wheels. And it allows us to take food shelf, emergency food services out to communities with low access, but in need of those services. And we offer crisis assistance for needs beyond food and intensive case management. Through our emergency food shelf program, we serve just under 8,000 individuals per month and distribute about 2.5 million pounds of food a year. So we are one of the largest emergency food shelf programs in the state. I'm not necessarily proud of saying that, because it also talks about the need in our communities, which is constantly increasing. And one of our linkages to Roseville Covenant Church is that through your volunteers and your space in the parking lot, we have run a free farmers market program for the last 3 summers, and this has been our suburban distribution location. And that site has distributed a little over 100,000 pounds of fresh produce to our neighbors in need over 3 years.
I'm Karen Fitzpatrick, and I grew up in a small town in southeastern Minnesota. And after high school, I entered the Franciscan convent in Rochester, where with 850 other women, I tried to, we all did, try to walk in the footsteps of St. Francis of Assisi, living the 3 vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. I taught junior high for about 10 years. That's enough to wear you out. And then I served large congregations as the director of Christian education. And during subsequent years, I left the Franciscans and married my husband, Jim Fitzpatrick. And Jim and I were working in the Phoenix area when we heard about Art Simon, a Lutheran pastor in New York City, who became the founder and leader of a nationwide movement known as Bread for the World, a movement to end hunger. And Jim and I joined, and Art asked my husband and me to take a weekend trip to Occidental College in Los Angeles for a workshop led by C. Dean Freudenberger, who was an experienced agronomist who had worked in sub-Saharan Africa. And Dr. Freudenberger got us started on the right foot. That ending hunger was largely about teaching people how to grow healthy food, and then supplying the means to do so. So we began to form Bread for the World groups around the southwestern United States. Bread for the World now has thousands of members, and we use our citizenship for advocacy on behalf of people in poverty, people experiencing hunger in our nation and globally. And each year, Bread for the World carries on what we call offerings of letters, where the congregations are invited to address Congress about current hunger needs. So, more later.
My name is Hannah Volkman. I'm the Executive Director of Twin Cities Food Justice. We also go by TC Food Justice. We're a really new, young nonprofit organization. We work primarily with produce recovery, so we're working with grocery stores, farmers markets, and individual farmers to take any excess unsellable produce that they have that's still really high quality and delivering it to hunger relief groups in the Twin Cities. We exist in a context of a lot of other larger hunger relief organizations that are providing a lot of produce, and so what we've done is we've found our niche in working with smaller grocery stores, smaller farmers markets, and providing that produce to hunger relief groups that maybe only have one fridge or they struggle to have any produce at all. So that's where our priority lies with our partners in the hunger relief world, and we found that whether it's financial resource limitations or space limitations with the fridges, we're finding quite a lot of hunger relief groups that would really appreciate a weekly delivery of maybe 150 pounds of produce. And so that's where we found our spot. We've only been around for about 18 months, and we're growing pretty quickly, more into St. Paul. We're primarily based in Minneapolis right now, but we really do want to grow into our name and be more than just produce recovery and understand food issues and food justice in a larger context. So whether that's looking at policies or things upstream from the produce recovery and the food waste, that's I think where we'll be going in the next few years.
My name is Eric Wilson. I work with an organization called the Food Group. The Food Group is both a nonprofit hunger relief organization as well as a food bank that serves over 250 food shelf partners and hunger relief organizations. When Hannah was talking about doing produce recovery and some of the bigger organizations, that's why she kind of gave me a glance, is because we're one of the bigger ones. We serve throughout the state of Minnesota, and we go as well as into Wisconsin. My specific department that I work with is the produce programs, and I'm one of the coordinators of that program. And so we do just a number of things. You might have heard of a program called Fruits of the City, for example, where we go to people's backyards and we do what's called gleaning, which is basically rescuing produce from people's fruit trees if they have a bunch of excess fruit, for example. We go to the Minneapolis Farmers Market and we collect every Sunday from there during the summertime. And then we also have, I think what kind of makes us unique from other food banks is we have a farm and an orchard on site that we grow our own food and our own produce that gets sent to food shelves, as well as we work with local communities in mostly suburban areas in Hennepin County to have what's called giving gardens, where we grow the produce alongside community members to help glean and rescue some of that produce. And then we also go out to farms and we'll harvest directly from fields and bring that produce back. And then we do some educational programs, like a community food leaders program, where we work with individuals from food shelves, and we do just food systems work, talking about policy and how people can get involved in their own communities and uplift others that they work with.
You guys are all awesome. I'm feeling a little overwhelmed by all that they do. So that is huge, and I just applaud you guys all that you are doing so much. I'm just a gardener. I am Sarah Jane Van Ellen, and I'm helped with starting our community garden at Northeast United Methodist Church on the corner in Cleveland and Lowry. And we use our garden produce for our congregation. We're a communal community garden, so we invite others to join in with us, but I guess we have to do a better job of that because most people don't join in with us or don't know, as we were talking to some of our neighbors, that we were communal. But we support also our community meals that we serve on 2 Saturdays a month, and little kitchen food show.
Thank you for that. So this time what I'm going to do, and the focus of this panel is partly economics, but also just to inform you too about food scarcity and what that looks like. We'll start here at this end and just go down the line. But I'd like to focus kind of on the economics for the first half, and we'll give each of them about 4 minutes to talk about what that looks like in their context, as best they can. Like I said, economics is a big word, it covers a lot of things, so we'll start there.
Well, I think I'll also start talking a little bit about the fuller scope of our program. So within our emergency food shelf services, a little over half of the food we distribute to families is perishable food. And that can come through the food rescue system operated by one of the food bank organizations that helps to reduce food waste. They're taking things into the secondary food system, whether that's produce that's not quite cosmetically perfect, or it's deli food that will expire the following day. And they're sending it out to organizations like ours, and we get it into the hands of people who can utilize that as quickly as possible, rather than sending that food off to pig farms or, in worst case scenarios, the landfill. And we're hoping to increase the amount of perishable food, which we're distributing through our program. And we're doing that through a couple of means. We've gone through a program redesign this year called the Super Shelf. And we used our Rice Street location as the model. It's our busiest site, it's our most diverse site. And my thinking is if we can make it work there, we can make it work anywhere in our program. And we are bringing in more fresh food, making even healthier food choices, although we've been on this path for about 10 years in our program. And we're making the healthiest choice, the easiest choice, and most attractive choice for our program participants. We worked with the U of M Behavioral Sciences and U of M Extension to increase the utilization of that food. And our results are fantastic. We are at an 80% rating on the Healthy Eating Index, which, to quote one of the researchers, was about the best results you'll see anywhere. So we know, and I should also say, the average American diet was 56% on that scoring when we started. It's now up to 59%, so I think all of us are making better food choices in our own lives. So there is a little bit of tension there, encouraging healthy food choices from our clientele rather than more average choices. You won't see Doritos and Coca-Cola and Oreos on our shelves unless they come in as a community donation. So it'd still be a fairly small amount. And so there's pushing people to make better choices for themselves and their families. So that kind of change takes time. I mean, that's a cultural change, and it's a change in the way we appreciate quality food. We will be rolling out that same model to our other sites over the next 6 months. So we're hoping for similar results at other locations. And utilizing more of that food rescue system cuts down on our costs to run the program. So it allows us to get more high quality food out to our participants. If we're talking about the economics grant, local community donations of freshly grown food is the easiest and most economically viable way for us to increase the nutritional quality of food distributed out to our communities. In this past growing season, we had a little over 25,000 pounds donated to our program through local growers. Some of those local growers were at church gardens, where congregations have taken out some of their landscaping and just jumped into small-scale farming and then bring the results to our program to distribute to our neighbors. But that also represents a little less than 3% of the food we distribute. We could scale that up to 30 or 40% of the food we distribute. So in short, there is no limit. We will never reach that amount, but we could certainly do more.
Thank you for that. And I think it's great what Keystone does and the various innovations that you guys are coming up with to meet those needs. And let Roseville too know if there's anything we can do to further that message. Absolutely.
That's great. It's wonderful how all of this is going to fit together. I invite you at this point to stand up. And get comfortable in your standing position and get the sense of being grounded on both feet. Kind of stretch your body a bit. Okay, now stand on one foot. Need a chair or a partner there to hold yourself up, that's fine. Okay, back on 2 feet. Okay, you can now sit down. But I'd like us to go further with that 1 foot, 2 foot image. And that is, let us imagine that 1 foot represents action that we take to provide food for people in need. Either individuals or whole households, like we've just been hearing about. Anyone lacking insufficient sustenance. And let's have the other foot represent action we take for social change so that food in a given country, including our own, becomes more accessible. Food that is nourishing and abundant. Both feet represent the kinds of outreach we need to do to address hunger effectively. We may find ourselves at one given point in our lives more connected to one or the other. But we recognize there will always be people experiencing hunger, and we're always looking at new and better ways to address the other foot as well. I think a question that's percolating in this congregation recently is, would we be responding to the gospel if we found a way to grow food and make it available to those who are experiencing hunger in our neighborhoods and towns? And I'll share with you my experience in that particular realm. In my parish, Guardian Angels in Oakdale, we have a large garden space, several acres. And a little over 20 years ago, 3 women got together and got it plowed up and created a huge community garden. And with the competent leadership of 2 or 3 master gardeners and over 100 volunteers from the congregation, coming in to prepare the soil, plant, weed, hoe, run the tiller, harvest, and then deliver to 4 major food shelves in our area. And each year the produce is over between 9,000 and 17,000 pounds. So this is tons of food getting hauled out of that garden. Interestingly though, this same congregation annually presents the current year's Bread for the World offering of letters topic, where all are invited to write to Congress about the focus on alleviating hunger globally and many times a domestic issue as well. Each member of the congregation is invited to write the letters to their 3 members of Congress, asking that they support whether it's a local, a domestic, or a global issue that particular year. And we see these 2 actions, our community garden and the letter writing, as standing on the 2 feet. Direct service, social change. So this other foot of social change is the work of Bread for the World, which I mentioned earlier. Lobbying Congress on behalf of those who are hungry. Getting things done. Getting laws broadened. Getting efforts globally and domestically back on track. Churches and nonprofits do amazing work. But to be honest, what we can accomplish with the government is immense. If you could imagine 20 grocery bags sitting up here in front of us, just kind of picture that, brown bags from the supermarkets. Okay, 20 grocery bags. And if we look at them, we would realize that the food that becomes available for people in need, the efforts of local churches, all the nonprofit programs, what comes from our individual groups and things we're part of, would all be represented up there, as well as all the government programs. Out of those 20 bags, it would take 19 bags to represent the government programs, such as SNAP, well, often known as food stamps, okay, WIC, free and reduced school lunch. Those programs make up 19 bags. And all of our other local charity makes up the other bag. We need to keep that up. That's an important bag. But it's our advocacy to keep those federal programs that are going to do the bulk of the heavy lifting. So, as congregations and as individuals, we need to keep standing on both feet. You know how wobbly you felt when you were up there on the one foot? That's why we need both. The works of charity and the works of justice, the work of advocacy. The efforts that we put in to keeping SNAP or food stamps alive, as well as the other domestic programs. That's part of our response to the gospel call to feed the hungry. And so as Christians, let's keep trying to stand on 2 feet.
Thank you, Karen. I appreciate that. And before we go on too, you know, in my research for my paper that I wrote, I learned that only 3% of nonprofits, only about 3% of their budget goes towards lobbying Congress and lobbying for food change. So that's a tremendous problem, I think. I mean, I understand the need because nonprofits don't have a lot of money to do this kind of lobbying, but if you're able and if there's money to be put forward, I think that's one of the things that needs to be done. It can't just be food as well. And also with Guardian Angels, I know the head of chaplaincy recently appointed there, so you should put pressure on Joe and tell him that I told him to listen to what you have to say and work on that. Thank you.
So Twin Cities Food Justice is kind of a grassroots organization, but I like to call it Veggie Roots just because it's what we do. It's kind of corny, but sorry, I'm here for the puns. But we are operating on kind of a tiny budget, and that's partly because we are so new, and fundraising is always a challenge, but partly because the work that we're doing is largely dependent on the generosity of our volunteers. So we have, in our food rescue program, we have our volunteers usually are signing up for a weekly shift. They're going to their local grocery store, picking up 80 to 150 pounds of excess produce that can't be sold there, and they're delivering it in their personal vehicle or on a bike and trailer, which we have too, directly to the food shelf that same day. So we're relying on those volunteers' time, their gas, and their use of their vehicle if it's not a bike, and that direct transport every single week, and their commitment to that. So our operating costs stay pretty low, but we do hope that as we grow as an organization, we can start paying our staff, because at this point our growth is limited by the amount of time that we can commit to the work, because I'm doing this in my free time as well as my 11 staff, who are all wonderfully committed millennials. So we are reaching a point of scaling up where we want to be addressing some upstream food issues and also just expand our reach and work with more grocery stores, work with larger chain grocery stores to fill the gap where there isn't already produce recovery being done. So I guess in an economic context, our operations are pretty cheap because we rely on the generosity of donors, and we try to make our volunteering really fun, whether it's through the bikes or families get their kids involved helping pack the produce, and a family will commit to that weekly shift and do it all together. So I think because we can make it fun and we can make it a really quick, easy way to volunteer, we have actually an excess of volunteers right now. We're trying to find more shifts for all the volunteers we have, which is that's a blessing. So we're just trying to grow and still, grow in a way that we can be responsible to, because we don't want to grow too big and commit to too much when we're such a small organization and then disappoint people or not fulfill our donations.
I'm curious, where would you say your volunteers come from? Like what backgrounds of life do they come from?
Yeah, so a lot of them are university students at the local colleges and universities. We've got families, and they're kind of reaching out from our friendship networks and our family networks. But we're now extending. We were featured on KSTP in August for a little blurb, and that got us a lot of interest in volunteers just generally from the community. That feature showed how easy and quick volunteering is with us. So that's been a really helpful way to find volunteers. No. No, and the supplies we use, we try to make it easy. We train in our volunteers to lift correctly and use dollies and carts when things get pretty heavy. So anyone's welcome to volunteer.
Wonderful. And also I'll encourage you all as you listen to the panelists to have questions for them, because if everything goes as planned, we should have about 8 minutes near the end for you guys to ask questions of them that you're curious about.
Just a note on Hannah's volunteers. The food group got to partner with Twin Cities Food Justice and other organizations to do some events at Open Streets, and it was called Open Feasts is what it was called. And what we did is we were able to rescue produce and turn it into small side dishes and share that with people that just came by for free. And the volunteers that came from Twin Cities Food Justice are just rock stars. So yeah, they're awesome. But so I guess going back, so there was a couple words that Karen said that really stuck out to me as she was talking, and that's the direct service social change. And so I come from more of like from a farming and gardening background. The food group. So I come from more of a farming background and also a background of permaculture. And so much about that is about holistic care, and a lot of it is about just having what's called a closed loop or a closed system. And so the idea is not just things that you put into the ground, but then also as you harvest things, how do you put that back into the earth, and how do you reclaim the land, or how do you remediate the soil so that you have a system that everything that's going in is coming back out with the same amount of energy that you're putting into it. And I think a lot about as we talk about hunger relief and we talk about economics, that I also come from a social work background, and moving into the food world and into food banks and hunger relief, I thought that those were two separate things, social services and hunger relief, and seeing that really everything is so interconnected, and that's why I love this work so much. That's why it drives me all the time to want to go to work, and I have a huge passion to do all of this gardening, farming. You're not just a gardener, you're planting seeds to go along with the puns, and just in so many ways. And so I think about one of the questions posed earlier by Grant had sent us a few questions was kind of what is the difference that you see between economic activity and hunger relief work. And what I see, especially in urban farming and community gardening, is that there also needs to be some sort of economic growth for the people who are involved in it. And so if there's a way to create jobs, or if there's a way to give people choice to put with their dollar, that is huge. I think that we oftentimes within the food world, it becomes kind of its own subculture, and I think it gets a little bit quote unquote fancier when we're talking about like people who go to co-ops, and it becomes another kind of like a hip thing. And I think something that's important is that if anytime that we can provide a way for people to be able to have a choice, to have a way that they can go and to decide, between buying, from a local farmer that's 3 miles away versus a quote unquote local farmer that's 500 miles away, then anytime that we can give a choice to support a garden or support a local farm, that is really the importance and really should be priority. And I think what's really neat about hunger relief organizations like Keystone and like what we're doing at the food group is that we have this healthy food index, that we're looking at the nutrition labels and we're making a choice to specifically say, no, that has too much sugar, no, that has too much sodium, and that's not going to be put on the shelves. And I think what's cool about that is that going back to the idea of like co-ops is we put this beautiful, perfect, let's say tomato out that has no bruises on it, or it doesn't have any spots on it, and yet sometimes for food shelves instead it's like we give out boxed stovetop stuffing or something. And so to be able to give people the same quality that going to a co-op might mean, or going to a local grocery store, that is really what I think is the awesome thing about this work, and being able to work with like local farms or local gardens and places, people to do that, to be able to provide things like that, and to really hear people's voices about that. I think like some of the lessons I've learned in all of this is that a lot of the work with nonprofits is because it's about grants, and it's about, pushing out these numbers, and we're all kind of competing with one another for the same funds, is that I think we often lose sight that sometimes we're missing the need of what's culturally appropriate foods. And so if there's a way to somehow change that narrative, I know that's a big, complicated solutions, and I don't know quite really what the answers are to that yet. But the more people that we have growing, and the more people that we're doing this holistic management, where it's not just about just providing the food, but if we're also teaching people what to do with the food, and we're also asking other people, well, what do you do with a tomato? And that might look different than what I do with a tomato, for example. And so if we can include everyone in the conversations and everyone's at the table, that goes back to kind of just similar to gardening or farming, where everything that we're putting in is also what we're getting back out. And if we can just continue to keep that in mind, I think that's kind of how we kind of bridge a lot of those gaps, and that's how we make the entire system holistic and the same and equitable for everyone.
Thank you for mentioning that, and also mentioning the elephant in the room about competing with one another. I think that's one of the big things. I mean, if we can somehow cut down on the amount of infighting that is occurring just simply because of policy, I think that would be a huge boon to food scarcity in general. Thank you.
So I'm a gardener, and I guess I'm going to talk about how we got started at our church more so than anything else, since you guys have addressed some other huger. Anyway, it started with a group of us sitting around a table at a community night, wondering how do we help grow our church congregation, since we're such a small group. And we had been focusing on our environment and recycling and things like that, and it's just like, well, how do we let people know this is a big deal to us and taking care of our earth? And we thought, a garden. That will tell people on the outside what we're about on the inside, to let them know if they'd like to come and join in what we're doing in our congregation. So it was the funnest meeting I have ever attended at church. 7 women in February running around in the snow being excited about planting gardens. So it was great. But we also wanted to make sure that we sort of had some basic guidelines of what the purpose of our garden, besides feeding people. So recreating a doorway to God and Jesus through our gardens, inspiring hope in our community, stewardship and rejuvenation of our land and food for spiritual rejuvenation, creating an inviting churchyard, community outreach, supporting our community meals and food shelf. And I have to say, when I look back at what we initially had said, we're doing that, and I feel really good about that. Granted, it's not thousands and thousands of pounds we produce every year, but we're making a difference, I think. And I find that when we're in our gardens, people talk to us way more. I also find that we're working on trying to teach other people how to be sustainable. So we've started canning classes so we can help people know, because a number of generations have been kind of got missed in some of that instruction. Also, men are coming to our class, that want to be able to learn this, and I'm like, yay for you guys, you know. When we used to can, it was a whole family thing years ago. So, and in retrospect, we spent a lot more money starting our community garden than we needed. After I learned about lasagna gardening, it's like I would not dig up any sod ever again after learning about that. But we ended up, we got a lot of donations. A number of lumber companies gave us huge discounts. We had free a dump truck full of composted soil that we got free, what else did we get free? We got a number of things. So probably if we looked at what our true cost, it was someplace between $900 to $1,000 to start our garden, but I think we maybe spent $500. So it was pretty reasonable, and we have to refurbish our raised beds, and we're trying to make them so they're a little more accessible for older people, because we are an aging congregation. And we did get some grants to build retaining walls so that parts of our garden are handicap accessible for folks, and just being able to sit on the wall to weed instead of having to get out on your hands and knees or a hoe or whatever. But so we haven't had a huge economic, but I would say that it is a challenge for us, since we are a small congregation, that the number of people that actually join in and do the physical labor, it's tough. We don't have that many people that are willing to get down and dirty. Those that do, we're passionate about it, but I do feel like if we work on our communal aspect and people joining in with us, we could raise a lot more produce than we do. And the other thing that I'm kind of going to focus on this next year as a personal project is to find a family that wants to learn how to garden and help teach them in our communal garden, and then help them start their own garden in the future if they want to break out on their own. So I think maybe part of it is just us being able to engage more people that want fresh produce in the actual gardening. I think that might be where we help to eliminate more of the scarcity, but I think there's plenty of land. I just don't know if we have enough labor. So.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. And the fact that you have grants that allow you to, I mean, you address so many topics there about economics that I really appreciate, like the idea of an aging congregation. You know, what does that look like to make your garden accessible to those that have the willing spirit to do the work but just can't, but yet maybe if we somehow adapted, they'd be able to join in and all that. That's wonderful. And you know, I think that it is a labor issue. One question I had about economics was, with the canning process, does the church then pay for the canning materials? I mean, do you do all of that and you just lead the class then?
Yes, but when you say does the church pay for it, basically it's those of us that wanted to teach the class purchase the supplies, and it's a sense of a donation. Although this, I've started turning in my receipts. But the classes, what we've told them is it's a free class. We ask for donation if they want to, and if they actually want to leave with produce, then they have to buy the product.
Wonderful.
So then that kind of covers some of the costs. But we also do some of the canning as a little bit of a fundraiser. People can buy it as little stocking stuffer gifts at the holidays or whatever too. So that kind of helps balance our costs and on some of the supplies.
That's great. Thank you for sharing. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to the panelists to ask each other questions, you know, that you thought of. I know, Eric, I saw you write feverishly. I'm sure you've got some questions to ask your fellow panelists. And we can just go down the line. If you have questions, just raise your hand and we can pass it down too. So, thank you. You can start wherever.
That's fine. My question is for you. So my question is this: is kind of how do you retain volunteers throughout the entire growing season, if that does happen? And then how do you, if you've thought about it, like how do you meet people where they're at if it comes to, like, I know labor is a huge part of gardening, which requires a lot of time. And what about people who don't have time to spend doing gardening? How do we begin to think about that as far as volunteers go?
So I'm not sure I totally get what you're saying, but so we have a core group of about 5 of us that manage the garden. And then there's probably another 5 to 8 that drop in a few times during the season. And then those same ones usually help with the spring planting and the fall cleanup, which is the only time I really find frustration is if they can't come and at least help rake leaves. But anyway, but we end up giving a lot of our produce to the little kitchen food shelf. So I guess I'm thinking that is what you're referring to as how do you help the person who can't volunteer? Yeah, and actually we offer always to our congregation, they're welcome to harvest as they need. Kind of our little rule of thumb that we have when people are asking about gardening and coming and gardening with us, I just encourage them to come and help us at some point if they would like to, and that just harvest enough for a meal. So then there's always something there for somebody else to harvest that might be hungry. And so far, and we do plant cherry tomatoes and things right next to the sidewalk, so people are encouraged to go ahead and pick stuff as they go by. And our blueberry bushes, although one guy just harvested the whole bush one day. But anyway, I guess that's what it's there for, and it was a wonderful day for him, so that's all right though too. And I forgot to mention, we did on our second year of our garden, we planted fruit trees, and all different congregation members just donated the cost for an apple tree or a plum tree or an apricot and cherry trees and stuff like that. So this year we had a lot of cherries finally, and don't know what's going wrong with my plums, but does that help?
Yeah.
And is there anybody else who has a question on the panel for another panelist? One other thing I remember talking about early on before the panel started was we were talking about how oftentimes there's this myth out there that that America has enough food to feed everybody. There is no such thing as food scarcity, which is partly true. We were talking about that a lot of the food, Christine was talking about how a lot of it goes to cattle and to other things, or it's, food that maybe just isn't used. And also the nutrients, the macro foods like fruit and vegetables that people need or that are part of the equation for healthy eating. It just doesn't, we don't have the amount of food to fill those needs as far as dietary requirements by the government. It doesn't show up as being possible right now, which I think is really fascinating given our state of being here in the United States. I don't know, Christine, if you want to speak more on that, but that might be something that you could share about.
I can say a few things, but by no means am I an expert on the Farm Bill, which should be called the Food Bill. As Grant was saying, we don't produce enough fruits and vegetables in this country to meet those new recommendations of, 7 to 11 servings per day. But we produce much more than is needed if you think of soybean and corn crops. Most of those actually become animal feed because we eat such a large amount of meat in this country. So we need to see a shift in our agricultural priorities, and we also need to see a shift to more local production of fresh fruit and vegetable crops.
Wonderful, yeah, that's a big deal, I think. For sure, the local aspect of everything is huge. And the other thing too, I want to mention too, is when we talk about food scarcity, we're also talking about the buzz term, food desert, or where you have the inner city where a lot of the big stores like Target or Cub or Whole Foods or whatever are not in the inner city. They're out in the outskirts somewhere in a suburb, which leaves mini marts which don't have the healthy food that people need and require. And I'm sure our panelists can maybe even talk to that a little bit too. That's kind of the buzzword now. And one of the things I also mentioned is food waste is definitely a problem. And I'm glad that all of you have talked about, especially the food group and food justice, your groups are fighting that food waste aspect, which, in the future, I learned about a company through NPR the other day where they were talking about a company in Ohio that, breeds flies, pestilence, to eat the remaining food, and the larvae turn into flies, and the flies are turned into fertilizer later on. So there's a lot of different things that people are doing nowadays to combat food waste, but I think it really does start with it'd be better if humans just ate it rather than fly larvae. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
So.
And we're doing more work within our program to use more food that would have been food waste. We're working with Second Harvest Heartland and their food rescue program to utilize more of that product on a daily basis. So it comes into one of our sites the same day that it turns around and goes home with someone to become their dinner. And to capture as much of that secondary food system as we possibly can. I think there's a campaign going on in the Twin Cities right now that you may have seen the posters at bus stops, that 40% of the food used in America actually becomes food waste. Some of that's in the processing steps, some of it is after it comes into your home, but we can all do a better job of utilizing the food we have available to us. I am very happy to say that Keystone works with the food group, and Keystone is beginning to work with Twin Cities Food Justice. So I think we're creating tighter linkages to make sure that everyone in our Twin Cities metro area who is in need of food has good, healthy food choices available to them. I wanted to talk a little bit about food deserts, but also food swamps, because we have deserts and we have swamps in urban areas. The deserts, depending on who you talk to, would be an area that does not have a full-service supermarket within 1 to 3 miles. And a means to get there, like a good public transportation route or a walkable route to access that food. But we also have food swamps, and some of it can be the corner stores, but it's also the fast food restaurants that are easily accessible to us, and it's having plenty of food choices available, but of very low quality food and food which does not satisfy your body's needs.
Thank you.
I had something to add on that.
Well, sure. I'll add on to you. Sure. Yeah, so we are seeing that as well. And you know what? I'm gonna let you go first. I'm gonna collect my thoughts.
And just so you know, in a little bit, I think also, so we'll make it quick, but I want to leave time to let the audience have some questions too.
Yeah, thanks for the term food swamps. Another catchy new term that I've been hearing is food mirages, which is a similar idea, is where you see a lot of these foods where people can purchase food, but it isn't necessarily nutritious food, right? But I want to just really touch base on the corner stores. I think also something to keep in mind as we talk about corner stores is we shouldn't equate them as being, quote unquote, a negative thing or a bad thing. I think that they do fill a need in certain communities, and I think we should, going back to that idea of holistic management, is looking at really how can we uplift a corner store, how can we work with the corner store to maybe get the infrastructure that maybe it needs to have, the storage to keep produce good for a few days longer than what they have on a shelf by the register, for example. And to recognize that that might be someone's business, that might be someone's livelihood within that local community. And so how can we support that as a local community? We talk about supporting local agriculture, but let's also support someone's local business as part of that loop.
I'm just going to quick. So I was going to actually ask you, Eric, and it was in relation to a corner store. What about the small local farmers that are doing really small, that they actually get connected with some of these small stores, that they make their deliveries like a CSA just to them to help keep the cost lower? Or some of the donated that if we can move, is it possible to move some of the low-cost recycled stuff in?
There's a group that was started by the University of St. Thomas. It's called Brightside Produce, and they are a wholesale for corner markets for fresh produce, and the way that they keep their costs down is they buy in bulk and deliver it to the corner markets, but then they also have a CSA through the University of St. Thomas, so they can keep prices down by buying in bulk, and then the St. Thomas community has CSA boxes as well. So there are some really innovative approaches, and that's like a for-profit company. They're trying to build business models that are sustainable and that we can repeat, in other areas as well. Yeah, so she's wondering, don't they need to keep the cost down in the corner stores? Absolutely. And I mean, refrigerating space, every single space in a corner store is a high commodity, and to have a fridge and the extra stuff that goes along with keeping produce fresh and looking good is also a big cost for corner markets, yeah.
I can add, we do a program called Fair for All. I don't know if people have heard of that, where we do a very similar thing where we buy wholesale from a number of different markets, and then we take it to different. We have at our warehouse, we do it every other week, but then we go around the Twin Cities metro mostly and do different drop-off sites like once a month, and so people can come and get discounted groceries, and there is no financial need, there is no financial limitations. Anyone from any income level can come, and we accept SNAP, EBT, WIC at those programs as well. So we're doing something similar to that, but we kind of we might set up at a food shelf, or we might set up in a parking lot somewhere to do something like that.
Wonderful. At this time, I'd like to open it up for questions from you all. If you have any questions for our panelists, I'll bring you the mic, and we can go from there.
There's a program in Pine City, which is north of the Twin Cities, about 60 miles or so. And I don't know if it's run through the county there or the city itself or whatever, but it works through the food shelf. And people who come to the food shelf to get produce and other foods can sign up to have, there's a big garden space, maybe the quarter of this gym, maybe a little bit less than that. And it's fenced off. There's a shed where they have hoes and rakes, not small tools that you would need for gardening, but the large tools. And there's a water source. And they'll come and put compost on there, but the person has to work it themselves. The people who are interested in doing gardening for their own personal use have to attend a 2-hour gardening session so that they know kind of learn how to do things if they aren't familiar. And they have to promise they'll keep it weeded and so forth. But they can get, it's like a couple of rows per person. And they can grow whatever they want there, and then if they have excess foods that they don't use personally, then those go to the food shelf. But it's really a great program, and I wondered if there was something similar. I know that land is more of a premium within the Twin Cities, but it just seems as though something like that would be beneficial all the way around. Good for the person to learn how to grow their own things, as well as to share what they don't need, but also take some of the burden away from the food shelves providing everything.
That's a great question. Can anybody respond to that?
I can. I came to Keystone from another program in the from an organization in the Southwest Metro. And we had about a 2.5-acre area, which was donated by a corporation in Bloomington. And we offered the exact same program model you described. And when that business was sold, we lost the land. So we were dependent upon that in-kind donation of land to use, and they also donated the water for the garden. So within the Twin Cities core, exactly what you said, land is at such a premium that it's difficult to operate a program on that scale. There are a few community gardens in our area which set aside a few plots for low-income families who can come in without that annual membership fee and use the land. And these programs are fabulous for newly arrived Americans who have more history, a very recent history of growing their own food for their families.
Wonderful.
In Matamita at the, what do you call it, district center, there was extra land, and a woman on the staff had it all set apart for small gardens. And then there's a lottery system, and a lot more people trying to get them than there were plots. But it was so fun to walk over there when I'd be volunteering at the food shelf there and take a look at what the people were growing. And some of them would get enough surplus to even donate some to our local food shelf. So I think any way you can do that locally to make some land available, especially in urban areas, that is such a gift.
Wonderful, thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? I do want to let the panelists know it is the time that you were, to be here, but if you don't mind staying a little later, that's fine with me. It's up to you, though. You're more than welcome to do what you need to do.
I just had a quick question for those low-income people who don't know what to do with fresh fruits and vegetables. Is there a lot of teaching that goes on?
Our model right now is more anecdotal teaching in the food shelves. We have a couple of our volunteers are retired nurses, teachers, nutritionists, helping them with some of the difficult food items that come in. I'm amazed every year at the number of people who don't know what to do with a winter squash. And we get so much of it, and it lasts forever. We're not worried about refrigeration space. So we're trying more one-on-one models right now. I just hired a new staff member a few weeks ago who is a registered dietitian, and hoping we can expand out the education models there. There's a program run by the U of M Extension called Simply Good Eating, which requires participants to come to multiple 2-hour sessions, and we don't have the facility available to offer those classes. And our clients' lives are chaotic, and they're working on so many things at once to stabilize their families. We cannot get firm attendance for several weeks out.
Well, and
So
two economic questions I have for that are, how much did it cost you as a nonprofit to have that dietitian come on board? How much money per year is that? And also, is there a way that churches can partner with you as far as having the space to hold those 2-hour classes? That's something that I think there could be partnerships made.
And we have explored that model with many of our congregations. Roseville Covenant is one of our Keystone congregations members. Thank you very much. And so we do partner with those churches for some of our additional programming. It's still the catch of getting people to come several times for several sessions. We've tried single 2-hour standalone sessions also. The cost of hiring a registered dietitian, she's actually in a role that's not entirely a registered dietitian, so we're getting as much value out as we can. But salary and benefits, you're still looking at over $50,000.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to, I'm a church architect, so I deal with churches and the grounds and looking at, we're just looking at our place here where we grow grass and cut it and grow it and cut it and grow it and water it and cut it. Thinking about, this used to be a fruit orchard. I don't know if you know that before it was a church. And so there's a place that produced food, and now we produce grass clippings. And so we're thinking about enclosing a garden to make safe play along busy streets, as well as potential of having gardens. So I think each one of you, we could probably sit down and have a group talk with you about how to build a garden, what to put in the garden, what do you do when you have all your leftover green beans like I do in my yard, how to share it, how to advocate for other people. So I think it's great for you to come in and share your experience, and thank you for what you're doing.
Absolutely. Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, and I don't know about anybody else. I kind of want to, hear about lasagna gardening. I wanted to know more about that. I don't know if anybody else is curious. If you could speak to that, I'm not sure what that is.
You take a bunch of paper and wood chips and junk and you cover up your grass and it kills it, and then it decomposes and it helps to fertilize your soil that you can plant in. So it's not real tough. You can use those grass clippings too, that'll help also. But it's just layers of cardboard and paper and wood chips, and You can put some of your composted materials on it too if you want. There isn't exact rules, right? You can be pretty creative, but you always have to worry about your neighbors a little bit. So don't put too much food waste in there. But shoot, I had something I was going to say. No, I can't remember.
That's totally all right. That's totally all right. And I think too with Roseville, I know we want to have some gardening, and so that's something for the future that we hope to plan in here. But I also want to make aware to everybody too, the reason why a lot of places in the cities have raised beds is due to the soil levels not being conducive or having trouble with contamination, whether it be arsenic or whatever. Raising the beds allows for that safety factor with the food. And so when land, like she was saying back there, Christine was talking about losing all that land for food, that's a major problem. And raised beds also allow for easy transfer should something fall through like that. But it's really great when a church can donate land to a cause like that, because we know the land's not going anywhere unless the church dies. So I think that's wonderful.
I remembered what I was going to say. When I was speaking with the director for the Little Kitchen Food Shelf, I was talking to her about a project and stuff that I had wanted to try to do. And her comment back to me about having people come and garden with you, she says, they don't always have the time. They're juggling 2 or 3 jobs, and for them to actually raise their own produce is probably a real challenge. And her suggestion to me was start enlisting middle school children of those families to help teach them how to garden so that they can actually do something to help their family. And a lot of times she's found that they're more receptive and have more time on their hands. So that might be a thought.
Thank you for that. Is there anyone else with any questions? We're pretty much near the end here, but we have a couple more minutes before the second service starts. Anyone?
I don't have any questions, but I've been involved in food distribution through Second Harvest it's in the Frogtown area down there. And I know one Friday we gave away 12,000 pounds of food. All 2 semis come down with food, and this was basically fresh stuff that had been rescued from stores. And part of it was Frogtown Farms, which is located in the old Wildman. They got 5 acres there. Right now they're producing 2.5 acres, but they need more volunteers to. And the one Friday they came down with 1,000 pounds of fresh produce. And there's another group called Youth Farm. And they teach people how to garden, and then they teach them how to cook.
That's wonderful. I mean, you can see the need, just even like what he's saying, that the volunteers is a major issue. That is, I think, maybe one of the single most important economic issues facing the gardens that we already have. The infrastructure in some cases is there, but then we don't have the people to man it.
We're too busy watching cat videos.
That's right. Yeah, we have to somehow. And I think that starting young, I think, is an important thing, because then you can get them outside.
Yeah, I started planting potatoes with my grandpa and my little brother when my little brother, I think, was about 3 and I was 4 or 5. And I still think of him every time I garden. So you're not too young to help. So.
Absolutely. I want to thank you all for being here, and I really do appreciate it. I think it's great what you're doing, and if there's any way that our church can help you, I'd love to have more conversations with you on that. So, but thank you all, and thank you all for attending. I appreciate it. And feel free to have more food if you want before you leave. If you guys want.
Yes, no. This is from Purchase Distribution. I mean, they're so I didn't have to take out the skins and that's Cucumbers. Oh my goodness, the cucumbers.